Casserole dish I dropped the night Martin died is still in the trash. I never bought another one. That's the kind of detail you don't think to mention when people ask how you're holding up. That you stopped making casseroles, stopped cooking anything that required more than one pot because there was no one left to eat it with you. Martin had been gone 11 months when my daughter convinced me to take the job at Cloverfield Senior Living. Not as a resident, she was quick to say, laughing a little nervously. As a part-time bookkeeper, 3 mornings a week. You know numbers, Mum. You've always known numbers. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent 22 years as an accounts manager for a mid-size insurance company in Tucson before I retired at 61 to take care of Martin through his decline. Now I was 64. Our savings were thinner than I wanted to admit out loud, and the Social Security check covered the mortgage, but not much else. So I took the job. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 7 to 1. The facility was on the far west side of Tucson, a clean, well-lit place that smelled of industrial floor wax, and, on Fridays, someone's attempt at cinnamon rolls. My car had been making a sound I didn't trust, and my daughter lived in Seattle, so I started using the ride app she'd downloaded on my phone before she flew home after the funeral. That's how I met the man who probably saved my life. His name was Eddie. Edward, he told me the first time, then immediately said everyone calls me Eddie, so. He drove a dark green Chevy Tahoe that had seen better years, and his rating was 4.8 stars. He looked to be in his early 60s himself, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a Diamondbacks cap that had faded from red to something closer to pink. I almost didn't notice him at first, just got in, said good morning, gave him the address. Standard. Long morning, he asked as we pulled out of the Cloverfield parking lot. Is it that obvious? You've got the look, he said, glancing back in the mirror, like someone who's been dealing with other people's problems since 7 a.m. I laughed before I could stop myself. Something like that. We didn't talk much that first ride. Just weather, traffic, the road work on Ina Road that added 5 minutes to everything. But when he pulled up to my house on Saguaro Lane, he said, same time Wednesday, and I realized he was offering something more than just the app's algorithm. He was offering consistency. After 11 months of a house that felt like it was rearranging itself around Martin's absence, consistency sounded like the most beautiful word in the English language. Wednesday came. He was there at 1 o'clock exactly, tar-high idling, Diamondback's cap in its usual spot. I got in, and he already had my address pulled up. I noticed his thermos in the cuff holder, the kind you get at a truck stop, a little dinged up. I asked if he'd eaten lunch. He said he usually just had coffee between rides. I started bringing him sandwiches on Wednesdays, not every week at first, just when I'd made too much for myself, which was often because I still hadn't fully adjusted to cooking for one. Turkey and Swiss on whole wheat, or a BLT if I had good tomatoes. I'd hand it through the window before I got in, and he'd look at it the same way you look at something you'd forgotten you were allowed to want. You really don't have to do this, he said the third time. I know, I told him. I made two by accident. He knew I hadn't made two by accident. I knew he knew. We both let it stand. The rides became the steadiest part of my week, 3 mornings going, 3 afternoons coming back, and somewhere between the roadwork on Ina and the left turn onto my street, I started learning who Eddie actually was. He'd driven a city bus for 23 years, he told me, before his knees got bad enough that sitting in the driver's seat all day became its own kind of punishment. His wife, Dolores, had passed 4 years ago. Cancer, quick and unkind, he said, without elaborating, and I didn't push. He had a son in Albuquerque he spoke to regularly but didn't see much. You know how it is, he said once. Life gets busy. I nodded like I understood, but what I heard underneath was the same thing I heard underneath everything I said about my daughter in Seattle. We love each other. We just live our lives in different time zones and forget to cross over as often as we should. One afternoon in October, about 6 weeks in, I brought him a sandwich and a slice of apple cake I'd made from a recipe Martin's mother had given me 30 years ago. I hadn't made it since Martin died. I'm not sure why I made it that day. Something about the smell of the grocery store, the Granny Smiths stacked in a pyramid near the entrance. I put a piece in a small container and set it on the seat beside him without saying anything about what it was. He took a bite at the red light on Thornydale, didn't say anything for a moment. Did you make this? Yes. From scratch? Yes. He was quiet another moment. My mother used to make something like this, he said finally. I haven't tasted anything like it in a long time. I turned and looked out the window so he wouldn't see my face. After that, the cake became our thing. I'd make it every few weeks and he'd tell me what was happening in his life, in the easy, sideways way that men of a certain generation talk about things that matter. His knee was better this month. His son had called twice. He'd finally gotten around to fixing the screen door Dolores had asked him to fix for 2 years before she died. He said that last one quietly, like a confession. I know about that, I told him. The things you put off because you thought there'd be more time. He glanced at me in the mirror. Yeah, he said, exactly like that. It was a Friday in November when everything shifted. Eddie picked me up at 1 as usual, but he was quieter than normal. Not unfriendly, just contained, like he was working something out behind his eyes. We made it halfway to Saguaro Lane before he said my name in a way that made my stomach drop. Elaine. Yes? I need to tell you something, and I don't want you to panic, but I also need you to take it seriously. My hand found the door handle without my telling it to. What is it? He didn't answer right away. He took the long way, turned north on Camino de la Tierra instead of heading straight to my street. I let him. A few days ago, he said, I picked up a man from the Walgreens on Cortaro. Late, maybe 10:30. He'd been dropped off there, I think, because he needed somewhere to be picked up from that wasn't where he'd actually been. I didn't understand what that meant yet. He was agitated, Eddie continued, on his phone the whole ride, talking in that clipped way people talk when they're trying not to be overheard, but they're also a little drunk and they can't quite manage it. I wasn't paying close attention at first, but then he said an address. Your address, Elaine, Saguaro Lane. And he said, she's going to be a problem if she keeps digging. The afternoon felt suddenly very bright in the wrong way. What? Who was he? I don't know his name, but I know what he looks like, and I know I've picked him up before. Eddie's voice was careful. He lives 2 streets over from you, in the beige house on Mesquite Trail, with the RV in the side yard. I've picked him up 3 other times. Always late, always on his phone, always a little too sharp for how much he's had to drink. I don't know anyone on Mesquite Trail, I said. I couldn't think of a single face. You might not know him, but he seems to know something about you. He mentioned Cloverfield. He said the name of the facility, Elaine. And then he said, she's in their books 3 days a week. We need to figure out what she's found before she takes it anywhere. The air in the car felt very thin. What does that mean? I said. I'm a bookkeeper. I enter invoices and reconcile accounts. I'm not investigating anything. Eddie nodded slowly. But has anything seemed off to you there? Anything in the accounts? I opened my mouth to say no and then stopped. There was something. There had been something actually for about 3 weeks. Small discrepancies in the vendor payments, supply orders that were billed at one amount on the invoice and logged at a slightly higher amount in the system. Not huge differences. $20 here, $40 there. The kind of thing that looks like typos until you line enough of them up and realize they're all rounding in the same direction. I'd been quietly double-checking my own work, thinking I was making errors. I hadn't told anyone yet. I hadn't been sure enough. Eddie was watching me in the rearview mirror. There might be something, I said carefully, in the vendor accounts. I'm not sure yet. His eps peel. The casserole dish is still gone. I never replaced it. But I make apple cake now more often than I used to, and I don't pretend it's by accident. I've been thinking about what actually happened, not the legal part, not the arrest or the sentencing or the auditor's final report, but the chain of it, how one thing connects to the next in ways you can't see until you're standing far enough back. I brought Eddie a sandwich because I had extra. He felt seen enough to pay attention. He paid attention long enough to notice something real. And because of all that, a man who had been stealing from elderly people in the most careful, patient, invisible way possible is now in federal prison. None of that happens if I eat my lunch alone in the break room and hand Eddie my phone to scan without looking up. I don't think that's luck. I think that's what happens when people choose to act decently in the small moments, the ones that don't seem to matter. Decency compounds. It doesn't always pay off, I know that, I've lived long enough to know that, but when it does, the return is almost always out of proportion to what you put in. A sandwich, a slice of cake, good morning, said like it meant something. What I keep coming back to is Eddie's notebook. That small, even handwriting, dates, times, exact phrases. He didn't keep those notes because someone told him to. He kept them because he understood, in a way that cost him personally to learn, that paying attention is not passive. It's a decision you make over and over to stay awake to what's actually happening around you instead of moving through the world on autopilot. That kind of clear-eyed attentiveness, the willingness to notice, to record, to trust what you're seeing even when you're not sure anyone will believe you, that's not a personality trait, it's a practice. It's something you build by doing it, and it starts with caring enough to try. And then there's what he did with what he noticed. He didn't immediately panic or confront anyone or make assumptions. He waited until he was certain. He gathered what he had, organized it, and then he acted. That kind of steadiness, seeing something through from the first uncomfortable observation to the moment you walk into a police station and lay your notes on the table, that takes something I can only describe as backbone. The willingness to be inconvenienced, to be possibly wrong, to be involved in something difficult because the alternative is looking away and living with that. Dolores didn't look away either. She noticed and she said something, and then life and circumstance and a husband who wasn't ready to hear it meant nothing came of it. I think about her more than Eddie knows. I think about how she carried that, the quiet weight of having seen something true and not been able to make it matter. I hope, wherever she is, she knows that it mattered eventually, that it came back around, that Eddie remembered what she tried to do and let it change how he moved through the world. I brought a new bookkeeper lunch last week, set it on the corner of her desk, didn't make a thing of it. She looked up with that particular expression, surprise mixed with relief, mixed with something close to gratitude, and I recognized it completely because I wore it too, in the back seat of a green Tahoe on an ordinary afternoon when someone said my name like it was worth saying. That's the whole of it, I think. You see people, they see more clearly. Things that should be caught get caught, and somewhere in that chain, without anyone planning it, a little justice finds its way into the world.